you so you guys can understand that in more detail. Like there's a lot going on when we do a neuro session. And when I say a lot, that's just barely scratching the surface. There's thousands of pieces of data and thousands of interactions. And the human brain is just such an amazing thing. Anybody who thinks that um, they have it all figured out, is they're just blowing smoke. I've been doing this for 35 years, and the farther we get into the brain, the more it's like as far into the universe as you can go. The deeper you go into the brain is just as far. And there's just stuff, things that we're learning constantly. So, we're going to walk through some basics about, what it is when you start with these numbers of theta ratio and high beta ratio. That is really just barely scratching the surface, but I want to show you a little bit more of how to understand those and then how to break those down into some of the smaller frequencies of the brain and what that means. So as we talk about the brain, let's just make sure we all understand some basic concepts. So let me share my whiteboard with you. Okay. We'll do that first. Okay. Um, so we can all see this, right? Correct? Yes, we should be able to see that.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So on the what I want to first start with is um, the human brain is working off of electricity. Okay. And this electricity is running 24/7. It's amazing. If this electricity doesn't run, we've got problems, okay? So the electricity is running 24/7. We make that from many different things, but the main thing that we make extra electricity from is oxygen. So you wonder why we work so much on breathing. It's because the electricity that makes your brain work is 90% of it comes from oxygen. The rest comes from water and food and sleeping, but most of it's coming from oxygen. And so we just take for granted our breathing and just say, well, I'm just breathing and I've been breathing this way my whole life. But breathing is so important to the making of the electricity. And the difference between how clean and efficient the energy source is coming from has a lot to do with not only our inhale, but how much of the toxins are coming out on the exhale. There's so much toxicity and waste product that comes out with that exhale. So we need that to be really good. And so why are we just sticklers on oxygen? Because it's really at the base. If we're going to study and improve electrical current in the brain, we have to make sure that energy is good. So we make the electricity and then we manage it. And what we have within us is this thing called the autonomic nervous system. You've heard me talk about this a lot, but it's very important that we always understand this, is that the autonomic nervous system has the capability to tell us to make a lot of electrical current at once or to use a lot of it that's been stored up. That's when it goes fast and referred to as sympathetic state. Okay. The autonomic nervous system can also say, hey, I think we should just use a little bit of electrical current, which is called slow, and that's parasympathetic. Okay. This balance between sympathetic and parasympathetic is being managed constantly in a way that it's not exactly like homeostasis. It's a little different than that. It's called allostasis in that it's trying to get stronger and more efficient over time. It's not just keeping a baseline, but it's actually trying to get things stronger. And so the autonomic nervous system is creating this balance. And the way it decides how it's going to use energy is primarily looking at the environment through our senses. Okay. But as humans, we can use our frontal lobe to override that. We can think about things that actually can overactivate our autonomic nervous system or underactivate through our thought process. Animals really can't do that. Animals uh, they kind of go in this rhythm and work with their environment. Humans, we tend to override that. We're the only creature on the planet that chooses to deprive ourselves of sleep, which is choosing to not go in this slow state, which can be a very bad thing at times. Okay, so we're making this energy. And when we get down, and the reason you need to know this is when you see the theta ratio, okay, that for you is an indication of what is your autonomic nervous system doing. See, the problem with everything that we experience physiologically, psychologically, cognitively, emotionally, stems back to the autonomic nervous system. If the autonomic nervous system starts to run too fast or run too slow, then downstream, physiologically first, then psychologically and emotionally second, and then behaviorally third, we see the consequences of this going too fast or too slow. And so when you hear or see theta ratio and high beta ratio, those aren't just random numbers. Those are data points about how your autonomic nervous system is working, how this extremely complex system that's managing things like turning food into energy, right? Or keeping you at 98.6, or identifying something that's intrusive to you 40 years ago and remembering your immune system to keep that in check throughout your life so that it screens that out. Certain bacterias and different things that our body is learning, like all of this stuff, we need to be able to see how the system is working by looking at the autonomic nervous system. So let's just take a negative of that. If the brain starts running too fast, it stays in this fast state. Okay, so let's say it's running up here. Okay. Not because it's being chased by a lion, but maybe because of past events that have made it to go fast. Or maybe learned behaviors of obsessiveness and worry that make it go fast. Then the downstream effects of that are anxiety, sleep problems, avoidance, phobias, stress, because the system has gone too fast. It's not in a balanced state. Negatively, it makes it very hard for it to rest, recover, and sleep and balance itself out. Okay. So, what these two numbers do for us is they give us an exact placement, a very precise placement of where you are on this scale of speed. And why do I need to know that? Because that's going to be a predictor of my health, physiological functioning, and emotional functioning is where I am on this scale. Okay? So the first one, let's talk about theta ratio. And then we're going to look at our live demo here. Theta ratio is measuring the autonomic nervous system's brake pedal. How well can it step on the brake and let me recover and sleep? That's what theta does for me. Okay. Is it really measures that brake pedal. And the ideal number for theta is that your theta ratio would be around 2.7. Okay. And so this is a brake pedal. So you would want to be stepping on the brake pedal when your brain's awake, right around a 2.6 to 2.7. And that keeps the autonomic nervous system in really good balance. Okay. If this theta ratio, we're not talking about a high beta right now, we're talking about theta. If theta ratio becomes less, okay, so it's a brake pedal, right? And all of a sudden, there's not as much of it. What does the autonomic nervous system start doing? It starts going faster than it should, okay? And the real crucial mark for us is right around 2.0, okay? If I don't have enough of this brake pedal, so when I'm looking at the brain, it gets below 2.0, then that means that the autonomic nervous system is going to be leaning towards the sympathetic state, and it's going to make it very difficult for it to get into these restful states, these sleeping states. So this is a big predictor of sleep if a theta ratio starts to get below 2.0. Another thing that this predicts is if this stays like this over time, because sleep is so important to our memory functioning, that if this theta starts to slip even further down to 1.2, 1.1, and it stays there, that can be meaning that our sleep is getting so compromised that the very important things related to memory start atrophying and they're not able to stay. The hippocampus can't store those memories like it should because it's just not getting enough recovery or rest. Okay. So always remember when you're looking at your data, 2.0 and lower is a problem on theta. Now, one other thing on theta, theta is kind of bi-directional. You don't want too little of it, but you also don't want too much of it because now I'm starting to, if I get over 3.0, okay, I'm starting to now get in a state where there's too much brake pedal. This is a brake pedal. So if it's braking too much and start to getting over 3.0, then what starts to happen is now I'm residing down here in the slow states when I'm supposed to be awake. And the number one thing that impacts is attention. Is I start to find it very difficult to attend to things. Now, you might not even realize this, but back in 2013, this isn't the stuff that your pediatrician or your doctor tells you, okay? But mainly because they probably don't know. But in 2013, the FDA said if you use this marker of an EEG of the theta ratio of greater than 3.0 in your assessment, you will improve the diagnostic accuracy of attention diagnosing ADHD by 30%. Okay, so if you would just take the time to get a 5-minute EEG when you're looking at whether somebody has an attention disorder, that means that your diagnostic accuracy, if you use this marker of 3.0, will be 30% stronger. Well, that brings us to maybe wondering, well, what is the diagnostic accuracy of ADHD? So this has been studied and looked at, and actually in the new book, Extinguishing Einstein, coming out in January, we talk about this. But if you take a group of multidisciplinary people, psychologists, psychiatrists, social worker, a teacher, put them all together, and they all look at a case, their accuracy for ADHD is 61%. That's not much higher than a flip of a coin. If it's just one provider, if it's just your pediatrician, the accuracy goes to about 48%. That's a little scary when you think about a flip of a coin, the accuracy. But if you bring in this theta ratio, because it's so accurate, it increases that 61% up to 91% because it's such a great predictor of attention. Okay. Okay, let's talk about high beta and then look at our live demo. Fascinating stuff, right? Is you're looking at stuff that's very diagnostic, better than anything else you're going to look at, better than your Fitbit, better than anything you're looking at, is this EEG is giving you the ultimate in upstream information. So the last thing I'm going to look at is you've got the autonomic nervous system. We said that it goes fast, it can go slow, okay? We talked about theta. We want it to be around 2.7. And then the high betas, the fast brain waves, we want those only go in one direction, okay? The ideal spot for those high betas is right around zero point 0.4, okay? Zero point 0.4. And anything that starts to get up to 0.6, zero point 0.8, 1.0, these are all gas pedal brainwaves. They're the ones that let us respond to crisis. So if we start to get too much of those, the brain starts to act like it's more anxious and it's more revved up. Okay? So we want that ideal number to be in a perfect balanced state to be around 0.4. I do have some NFL quarterbacks that we work with that are 0.29. There's a couple of my clients that have been running a very long time who can get into the low 0.3s. That's like rare air. That's being in the perfect zone and not in a stress state, but a perfect zone, calm state. And that's, you always want your high betas to be as low as possible. They're huge predictors of stress-related disease. The higher they get, the greater potential is for stress-related disease. So we always want those lower, okay? Now, one more thing before we look at the live demo. Okay, so I talk about these ratios, and you're like, well, where are these numbers coming from? Okay, so in your brain, you have primarily 35 different brain waves. There are more, but the ones that are really kind of make everything happen are between 1 and 35, what are called hertz. A hertz means how much a brain cycles in a second, or electrical current cycles in a second. So a 1 hertz brainwave means that the brainwave cycles one time in 1 second. That's what a 1 hertz is. If that's what a 1 hertz is, then a 20 hertz means the brainwave cycles 20 times in 1 second. Very fast, okay? So just so you know where we're getting these ratios from that I'm talking about, theta and high beta, 0 to 12 are your slow brainwaves, okay? And there's a subset in here called theta. And the reason we can measure your brake pedal is if we look at your theta waves over top of kind of the perfect speed running waves, which is right here around 15 hertz, okay? If we compare that, we get what's called the theta ratio that you saw earlier, and that's the measurement of my brake pedal because I'm seeing how do my thetas, which are slow brain waves, affect the rest of my brain waves, okay? So we want, again, those to be around 2.7. High betas are looking at these fast brain waves that cycle super, super fast, and it's taking those, the high betas, and it's comparing them again to the ideal brain waves. And it's that ratio of the gas pedal or the fast brain waves that tell us how much we're using these stress-related brain waves. Do I need those for crisis? Yes. But the higher my baseline of these brain waves, the more potential there is for crisis in the brain, anxiety, stress, and ultimately the beginning predictors of chronic illness come from these stress-related brain waves. Okay, a lot of info. Let's go ahead and we're going to now look at somebody's brain, which is really, really cool. Okay, rather than just look at it, you guys needed a little base to get started. Okay, so here we go. Let's go ahead and stop that and then let's share screen. Boom. And let's see. Okay, so here we're going to look at this person's brainwave. John's been waiting for us to log on here, John Wieringa. Okay, and this is literally the brainwaves that are cycling in his brain. And guess what we see right here? 16 and 20 hertz. That's kind of that middle set of brain waves, those ones that make us calm and focused. 16 and to 20. So I want to look at those, okay? But then let's scroll down, okay? And let's look at some other brain waves, okay? Let's put this over here. So we're looking at now let's go down and see what's going on with the fast brain waves. So I'm looking at all these different sets here. Actually, before I get there, here's those theta waves that we talked about, okay? 4 to 8 hertz. If this person needs more theta, then I like these spikes here. See the big spikes? I like that. But what I don't like are these valleys, okay, when it gets too low. And so when we do neurofeedback, we're rewarding the highs and we're saying no to the lows because I don't want these lows. I want the highs, okay? That's very, very important. Can you repeat that, John, for me? Can you hit repeat? Thank you. Okay, perfect. There we go. Okay, so here's his brain coming back online for us, okay? And here he's actually doing a session, okay? And do you see the little orange, or if he was doing a session, that little orange area would pop up and it would create a threshold for when the video is going to stop and start. And this one I want more of, so the video would play up here, but it would stop down here below the line, okay? Now let's go look at his crisis brainwaves, okay? Let's look at the fast ones. Let's look at the ones. Now this is running, guys, this is amazing. This is running 24/7. His brain is making these brainwaves 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, okay? Here is his stress-related brainwaves. These are stress-related brainwaves, okay? Right here, this section, okay? So anything that's going to trip him up is going to be these spikes. Do you see these little spikes? Those are all stress spikes. We all have them. Some of us have more than others. What we're able to do in neurofeedback is we're able to draw a line, basically. And we can do this in real time. And we can say everything above the line in the stress brainwaves, I'm going to say no. And that's where I'm going to make the movie pause when it has the micro pauses is no, don't do that. Every time he goes below the line, I'm going to say yes for the video. Okay. Back in the early 70s, it was a light bulb that would go on and off to treat epilepsy. That was the first disorder actually fully managed through this type of treatment. Now it's branched out into everything from ADHD to peak performance to sleep disorders to anxiety. But what we're doing is we're rewarding the brain above and below the line. Okay, John, you don't have to start back up because we're now going to go look at John's data from earlier. Okay, so let me pull this up. And here is, okay, you guys can see this, I think. So this is John's CZ. So this is the center. And a lot of you have been training at the center, okay? But we also train at the left and the right. And so with our new addition to the software, which is really cool, is we can send you an assessment. So instead of doing your training that day, you can do the assessment of your center, your left, and your right. And we can start to see all of these different frequencies on your brain. And then we can collect that and we can talk to you about that. And then you can get right back to the next day during training. So this is what we did with John, is we said, hey, John, I'm going to have you do the assessment. He actually sent himself the assessment because he knows how to do that. He's the one who designed it all and made it all. So he sent that to himself. And here's his CZ numbers, okay? His theta ratio at CZ was 3.6, or yeah, 3.6, okay? And his high beta was 0.4. So based on what we know from what we talked about, we can see that John's theta is too high, okay? And that's what he needs to work on to bring it down. Now, the really positive thing is, after we look at the left and the right, if this keeps playing out on the left and the right, and he doesn't go below 2 in any of these areas, we know that he doesn't have the underlying neurological makeup that would cause a memory disorder. That's not his thing at all. That's not going to be his Achilles heel. He is going to, at times, have a little bit difficulty kind of staying on task. And so that's what happens at CZ, is that is up a little bit, okay? And this can also be related to sleep and a few other things, but that's a little bit higher than we want to see. So during training, in his case, every time he has a peak of theta, we're going to say no. Every time he has a valley of theta, we're going to say yes, yes, because we want his theta to come down. We also want to see, is the same thing happening at T3 and T4? Is this a common thing for his entire brain, or is it just one specific area? And that's why we want to measure more than one area. His high beta is pretty good at 0.54. That's within a decent range. I'd like to get him down into the 0.4s, but 0.54 is pretty good. Now, the cool thing that we can do here is now you can see all the different frequencies that make up John's brain at the center of his brain. I mean, that is really amazing. And by that, I can start to see what are some nuances of John's personality, what are his cognitive strengths and weaknesses, not just his theta and high beta number, because he's way bigger than that, and what is going on in the brain. So let me explain this. Is in the brain, when you have these frequencies, they follow a certain principle of physics. And what that is these slow brain waves. So this is a 4 hertz brainwave. So that means in 1 second, it does 4 sine waves. Okay. Here is a 25 hertz brainwave. So that means in 1 second, it does 25 cycles. Okay. So the physics of that is the slow brain waves should always have very high amplitudes, and the fast brain waves should have low amplitudes. Hopefully that makes sense. I'll say that again. The slow brain waves should have high amplitudes. They should be tall, and the fast brain waves should be very shallow, very small. Okay. So when you look at your brain, what should happen is it should follow this downward kind of curve to infinity. I mean, just keep going, and it should get lower and lower as it goes. Okay. Now, what we can see for John is in general, he follows that pattern, right? But I noticed that, what do you see here? Do you see this? Okay. You guys see that little kind of hump and then down? That is totally unique to John. That's like not everybody has that. That's a unique thing about him. And so what I can see is that these brainwaves right here, these have a lot to do with creativity. Okay? So now I know a feature of John's attention at CZ, the theta being higher, has a lot to do with the fact that John is probably an extremely creative person. That if it's not engaging creative wise, he's probably going to check out over time because he wants to engage the creative aspects. He has way more creativity innately than a lot of people that you're going to see because of these specific brainwaves. In an elite athlete, you're looking for some of this and also some peaks here because really good athletes have a lot of these creative waves too. That's what makes them be able to solve things right under pressure. Okay. One last thing about John is right at the end here, this part, we have a couple little spikes that we want to get those guys down a little bit. So that's the center of his brain. Let's finish up now that you guys are experts at looking at brains. Let's look at the left side of John's brain, because There's all these areas. There's about 21 different areas you can look at in your brain. And they're just separated in brain activity. They're separated by hundreds of miles, really. It's a small space, but it's just huge distances when you're thinking about the brain. And so here, John, very interestingly enough, okay, when we look at um, his theta ratio and his high beta again, okay, so now we're going to look at it. Did he stay at 3.7? No, he's now 2.7. What did we say earlier on his theta? So the left side of his brain, now we're at the left, we were at the center. The left side of his brain is 2.7. That is perfect. So there's nothing on the theta that we need to do for John's left side. It is absolutely spot on with his theta. But his high beta is 0.58. And we can kind of see that at the end of this. Do you guys see this? The end of the graph, how it just wants to stay up in a plateau. And we know the physics of electrical current, that it should be getting lower, right? And so it's these guys that we want to target as we get more refined in the EEG training, which happens in the refining and sharpening phases of EEG. Let's look at one other aspect of John's brain, which is the distribution, okay? We're going to look at the distribution, and what do we see again? We see this pocket of these creative waves, okay? And we know he has to stay engaged and exercise those because those are a very unique aspect of his brain, okay, is the creativity. His thetas look really good. These guys are when we want to make sure we're keeping that brain engaged on the creative side. And then also this area, which we didn't talk a lot about, is called SMR. And we want little peaks there. And he has those. So that's going to help a lot with staying calm under pressure. Okay. So these full frequency analysis let us really see the nuances in everybody's brain. Let's look at the last area. And what's very cool for you to understand here, and it's very important, is you saw the center was one way, right? And now we saw the left was another, okay? The idea that you can put one chemical in the brain and it impacts all these areas differently, that's not going to happen, okay? So if somebody takes an amphetamine and one area might need that, but another area it makes it worse, that's how you get side effects, is because every area is doing different things. And so we have to be very careful with how we're addressing the brain and not just flood it with a bathtub of a chemical, because everything's unique and it's so important for us to see that. Let's look at the last part of John's brain, okay? The right side. We'll clear this and then we'll be done. Hopefully this is giving you a little bit more insight into your numbers. And as we do assessments with you over time, we can explain more of these. This is interesting. Again, the physics of this is that these should get less over time. And I mean, hope you don't have to be neuropsychologists yet to see, huh, isn't that interesting? That is not getting less. It's a peak. And what is that? Again, that's the creative stuff. So if I was, like a headhunter looking for somebody for a company, helping them analyze, like we've done for companies where we'll do testing and stuff, and the person was coming to me and said, "Hey, we really need a really creative person on our team." Well, I've got him. That's this guy because he's wired for that. If they said, "Hey, we need an accountant who's obsessive," I'd say that's not this one person. Okay. And each of us are different. Let's look at his ratio numbers to finish up. And we have not seen that the 3.7 stayed the same. It was only at the center. And here he's at 2.63, which again is about perfect on his thetas. So I really don't want to do anything with his thetas, even though the one's high at the center. The high beta's 0.59, okay? A little bit up there, and eventually I want to get those into the 0.4s. But my analysis of John, okay, if I look at this, is the theta isn't a problem. The left side of his brain is 2.7, the center's 3.6, and the right is 2.6. Well, these guys are perfect, okay? Neurofeedback, we want to bring this down a little bit. But the one thing that's remained kind of consistent is the high beta has kind of been hanging out just a little bit too much. So on the right side, it's 0.59, center 0.54, here 0.58, okay? And this is a really cool thing about the brain. John's reason for this theta increase doesn't have anything to do necessarily with an attention disorder. It has to do with the brain is trying to find a way to address this, this, and this going a little bit faster, okay? And he has a lot of plasticity in his brain. So his brain has figured out that in order to address this, I'll make this one area go just a little bit slower to manage these guys being just a smidge too fast. And that's called neuroplasticity. If he had an attention disorder, all three of these areas would have high thetas. That's not what's going on. His thetas are fine there. The reason his theta's up at the center is it's trying to help with these high betas, and it's trying to get him down a little bit. So for him, when we're looking at training, it's always going to be about pushing the stress brainwaves down. And I bet you what's going to happen is if he gets sub 0.5 here, below 5 here, 0.5, below 0.5 here on the fast ones, this theta will naturally give way and start to go below 3.0. And it will start to even out more. Okay? That's a lot of info. I told you we'd do a live analysis. We'd love to be doing this with you guys as well. And so your coaches will be getting assessments on you. They'll be having some of this data, be able to kind of unpack some of it with you. Some of that will get sent to me. I'll kind of look through it. So just want you to know that there's a lot going on when we're doing training, okay? And we're all different. Everybody has different peaks and valleys. And the best way to help us out long-term and our downstream behaviors and emotions and psychological functioning and cognitive functioning is to be working upstream to keep the electrical energy in a perfect spot. Okay? So as I conclude, we went a little bit longer, but does anybody have any questions? You can send through the chat. Stephanie, did anybody send any questions through the chat yet? You can type it in the chat if you want to. The chat's right below. Did we get any questions, Steph?
No, nothing came through.
Nothing came through. Okay, gotcha. Well, this might be one of those lectures that you want to review and look over. So we do have a recording of it that we can send to you. Also, definitely feel free to talk to your coaches more about this. We have all kinds of information. But there's a lot going on when we're looking at your brain, and your brain's the most important thing that you possess on this planet is your brain. And let's take care of it. Let's make it work really well. And the more we understand this, the more we know how to make it stronger. Thank you for joining the lecture tonight, and hope you guys have a good rest of the week. And I will see you at the beginning of January. Remember, first Tuesday of the month. And we'll probably do that one in the evening. I did this one at 2 today because I'm in the Netherlands and it's really 8 o'clock here. So I was not going to do the 7 p.m. That would have been, I'd be up with you guys at 3 a.m. or something like that. So we'll see you guys. It's great to work with y'all. You guys have a good one. Okay. Bye.
Thank you.